Guys podcast with Brian, Brett, and Derek. Tonight we don't have Brett, the star of the show, but we do have a special co-host, Jennifer Pesicka. I hope I pronounced that right, Jennifer.
You did, yeah.
Okay, and I know that Jennifer doesn't want to give the intro for herself, so Brian is going to give you a grandstanding, great intro so everyone knows who you are and why you're joining us. But it's going to be great to have a woman's point of view tonight to fill in for Brett, and I hope that you'll come back again. And I think you are coming back again. That's what Brian said for a future episode. So go ahead, Brian.
Yeah.
Well, good evening, everybody. And yes, we're going to be missing Mr. Brett DiPietro, but we have someone coming in who I think is going to really bring the show to a whole different level. She has a great connection with our guests, who we'll be introducing as well in a few minutes. So. And she sent me a couple of binders of herself, so I don't know really where to start. But nice. Let me start with my connection to Jen. So Jen Pesicka is someone that I've worked with now for 7 years, going on 7 years.
7 long years.
Wow, has it been that long?
Jen, and these are some questions we'll even ask her. So Jen's lived all over the country. She went to University of Arizona. Go Cats. Go Cats. Has been one of the best hotel people in the country for the last 20 years. She's a part of the $1 Million Club. Right away, I'm like, that has to be a T-shirt. We're going to have to get that on a T-shirt, Derek, and put that on our website somewhere. The $1 Million Club. That'd be kind of cool.
Excuse me, the $100 Million Club.
Oh, yeah. That's a big thing. $100 million. And probably more than it's probably
like the West African.
Yeah, right. She's probably north of 100 million. She's probably being conservative. But one thing I do know well about Jen is big into health and wellness, and she mentions that in her bio. She's a runner. She's a Peloton person. I think our guest is also into Peloton, so maybe we can even touch on that. She's an animal lover. She's a mom of Nayla, if I'm pronouncing that right. Mm-hmm. Her 18-year-old cat, Bella, and a 7-year-old mini Australian Shepherd. And her other half is David, and they've been together almost 20 years, and it's kind of fun. It sounds like you guys grew up across the street from each other. So Jen, thank you for joining. You and I did a little bit of chatting earlier, sort of about our show and some of the stuff that you found interesting. And I think you were saying you were listening to the most recent one that we dropped, which was the roundtable with David. So why don't you talk a little bit about maybe what we missed on you? What can our listeners know about you? And then maybe touch on some of the few things that you've taken away from any of the guests that we've had on.
Yeah. Well, again, first, thanks for having me on. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think it'll be nice to have a woman's perspective. No disrespect to the three of you, but it's always good to have a little more. Yep. But yeah, no, like you mentioned, I'm originally from Tucson, Arizona, and then moved to San Diego in 2008 to open up our lovely property here. And Brian, as you mentioned, that's how we've got to know each other, is through work. But through all of that, my boyfriend / husband / whatever at this point is a college basketball coach. And so with that comes a lot of moving. So I think last time we tallied it up, we've been in 8 cities in 12 years, something like that. So we have literally lived in every single part of the country, with the exception of the Southeast. So it's been a fun journey. It's been great to work for a company that's allowed me to do that for all of these years. And yeah, Brian, like you kind of touched on, David and I we grew up across the street from each other. So we've known each other really since I've been like 13 or 14, all the way up. So it's been kind of a neat story.
That's awesome. Is he still a college basketball coach?
Yeah. Yep. So we're currently, right now we're actually in San Diego, but we're living in Los Angeles. So he's coaching up there, and makes it nice to be on the West Coast again, near all of our families and friends and all the stuff that's important. It's really fun to see how you guys have evolved. I've listened from episode 1 all the way through the most recent episode. And it started off really fun. It's just like three guys in a living room that grew up together, hanging out. And it's been so much fun, but it's been also fun to see how you've progressed and how the podcast has excelled. So congratulations on that. I only see it going above and beyond here, but I think you guys have done a really good job, and I'm excited for what's going to happen for you guys in the future.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate that. Seriously.
Yeah.
This week is someone who I've had the high level of luxury and pleasure and honor, and I'll just go down the list and say it all, to work with over, gosh, I'm losing count again. Was it 7 years? So Kerry Dunne is originally from Ireland. She now lives in San Diego, California. We're going to allow her to talk about her journey from there to here. Kerry is a senior events manager for one of the largest hotels in California, one of the nicest hotels in California, those events that you hear about. She's the one that does all the detailing, makes people like me, and well, probably make me look good. Jen doesn't need it, but I need her to make me look good. So Kerry, welcome to the show. We're so glad you joined us. We know how busy you are with everything going on in California, getting ready to open up. So we really appreciate you taking some time with the Three Guys podcast. So we're so psyched you're here.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Can you hear me? I'm not sure if my audio is working.
We can hear you.
Okay. All right. Perfect.
Yeah, I don't pick up on the accent.
Well, that's the first, thing that people notice. They say, "Where's this Yank from?" When I go back home to Ireland. No, I don't have a very thick accent. Anyone who started working with me at the hotel 9 years ago when I joined and moved to San Diego says that I had a very thick Irish accent back then. But I never thought I had much of an Irish accent because I actually spent the first 12 years of my life living in London. So I had a British accent, morphed a little bit into an Irish accent.
No, I caught it there. Right there.
There you go.
That's what I caught it.
Yeah.
I said a little bit.
Little bit. And then now it's American. So I can't win with any of my family members. The ones in London are mad that I sounded Irish. The ones in Ireland were mad I sounded British. And now they're all mad I sound American. So there you go.
So Kerry, we know your time is precious, and I really want to take as much time as we can with you to learn about your journey. As you know, the purpose of the show is to educate our listeners about our guest journey and sort of how they navigated through it, where it started, where they want to bring it to, where they are now. We know, I think you mentioned to us, it's not like some of the other people that have been on have had a book or this or that, but really what we want to hear from you is, because you're at where you are now, a high level position, as we talked about, within one of the biggest hotels within our company in California. So my first question is going to go from the beginning. Tell us about growing up in Ireland.
Okay. Well, first of all, it didn't start for me in Ireland until I was 12 years old. So if I back up a little bit, I grew up in London, right in the thick of Northwest London. Every weekend we would jump on the tube, as we call it, back over there and go explore a different part of London. So that was my city for 12 years. Went to school there up until even high school. My first year of high school was over there. And then my mother just said, I gave her a little bit of lip one day. And she's like, that's it. She's getting a bad attitude. She's hanging out with the wrong people. Not about this. I'm packing us up and I'm moving back to a tiny town, 10,000 people, called Tramore in Southwest Ireland. So I went from this really super large city, very urban environment, to a beachside town of 10,000 people, with a good few hundred of those being family members. So you can't really walk anywhere in my town without someone knowing who I am in some way, shape, or form. So that was a big cultural transition, big culture shock for me. We spent summers there every year as a child, but to actually have to live there. I mean, my first school, once I arrived in Ireland, was one building, and we walk up to it. I'm like, where's the rest of it? She goes, this is it. I was used to going to schools with 4 or 5 buildings, with a couple of thousand people in the school. This was a couple of hundred. So a big transition when I arrived in Ireland, but it was probably the best decision my mother ever made, because I was going down quite an interesting path. I had gotten into some fights in London. I was becoming a bit of a brat. And then you just didn't have that option in Ireland. You were less angry because it was more peaceful to live there. And two, you couldn't get away with it as much because there was family watching you everywhere. And you were just more occupied with things to do because you could get outside, you could go and, go for a walk on the beach with your friends, you could go play outside. So definitely a good move in the end. I'm not quite sure where my path would have led had she not picked us up and moved at 12 years old. And I fought her on it so much. I didn't want to leave my friends. I had just started secondary school, high school. And when I moved to Ireland, they put me back a year because the school systems are different. So they made me restart high school. High school's bad enough without having to do another year of it. And it's 2 years longer in Ireland as well. It goes until you're 18. But had she not done that, I think my life would look very different. I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you all, and I probably wouldn't be as successful in my career.
Well, I mean, first of all, Kerry, I disagree with your statement earlier where you say you don't think you'd be as successful if your path was different.
Mm-hmm.
I disagree. I think you're so good at what you do in any realm that no matter what you would have chosen to do, you would have been successful. I mean, we're very lucky to have you in San Diego, and it's been fun to see how you progressed in your career. And it's been fun to have somebody to talk to on a personal level. So just thankful for that, and that we've gotten to know each other on a personal basis. But you were talking about, kind of the differences in the three areas that you lived. Do you have favorites of each? Do you kind of mesh them all together like you say, or?
Yeah, there's parts of London that I miss, but London's a very angry place. Everyone's mad about something. I love the history.
Because of the weather?
The weather, something else. They're just too packed in. It's very, I used to think I missed London. I went back last summer. I thought, this is just so claustrophobic. There's so much concrete. The wind doesn't really blow. This is why everyone's so angry. So London for the culture and the history. I miss being able to just pop into a museum that has just such a rich history, being able to walk down streets that look like they belong in a 15th century movie. Ireland is just, you can breathe a little bit more. People don't care as much about what you do. So there's not as much pressure to constantly succeed. You're not in this rat race all the time. At the end of the day, if you have a roof over your head and your family's healthy, that's all you really care about. And you can feel that. And definitely as I've progressed in my career over in the States, I've become part of that kind of rat race and, always on to the next step. Where am I moving next? What career am I going, what position am I going to strive for next? You just don't have that type of pressure back home in Ireland. So when I go home for a couple of weeks, I'm like, okay, now I can just decompress a little bit and realize that I don't always have to be chasing the dream. But then I get back here and I get very wrapped up in it, and I'm an ambitious person. And so I enjoy that there are people all around me over here that just keep pushing me to achieve. And then there's just the superficial things that America is incredibly convenient. My mom says this all the time. You're never going to be able to come back home because you can order something. My computer that I'm sitting here talking to you on right now, I ordered it and it was at my house in 2 hours. So that just doesn't happen in Ireland. There's got to be a ship and, a docks and all of this stuff. So there's those superficial parts of Ireland that I probably would have a hard time getting used to going back home. My mom always jokes about that. But it's very different, more family centric too than I've experienced in California.
Karen, let's go back to when you were a little bit younger, before you came to the States. So tell me if I'm wrong. By the time you said secondary school, which is equivalent to our high school, right? So by the time you were in secondary school, you lived in two countries. Is that correct?
Yeah, I lived in London and Ireland.
So once you got into secondary school, where did you go? What was your education process after that?
So I did what's called a transition year in Ireland. So there is an optional year in high school. So I even went for a second optional year. And that's where you do a lot more vocational work. So you start your own business. They teach you all about, managing a business, being an entrepreneur, and you go out and do a lot of internships. And then the following 2 years are your state exams in Ireland, which are, the be all and end all of how you get into college over there. You have a point system and you have to collect as many points as you can to get into the course that you want. And so in that 2 years, I spent some time in Zambia for about a month in an immersion program over there, learning about, all the charities that we've been supporting in that optional year. And then once I finished high school and did my exams, I went into hospitality management degree in my hometown. There were a lot of other universities I could have gone to, but I chose to stay in my home city, not the town itself, but the city has a large hospitality college attached to it. So I worked there. And then I did an internship as part of that program at Washford Castle Hotel and Golf Resort, which is where I started my hospitality career. I was a server first, and then became the manager of that restaurant, and then moved into sales and marketing. And it was a bit of a trip for your first hotel job to be a 15th century castle that had been converted into a hotel on its own private island that you took a car ferry to every day. And then I went from there to here, to this big, huge, shiny hotel with 1,000+ rooms.
Kerry, did you know that you always wanted to do something in the hospitality industry?
Yeah, so events was always my goal. My stepfather, his brother actually owns some of the largest music festivals in London. So the Reading and Leeds Music Festival that takes place every year. It's a very well-known rock festival. And so I had spent my early childhood in London going around to all of these events with him because he worked in the security department, wherever his brother really needed him. My mother worked in a lot of those festivals too, and in a lot of major nightclubs in London. And so I was just so immersed in the events world by that point. I always wanted to do it. And I always dreamed of putting on these huge live events. And that's not quite what I do now, but it's the same thrill that you get out of it and enjoyment. And that's really what prompted me to go into the event management part. And then with hospitality, it's just the ability to travel the world. That's all I wanted to do, was get out of my little small bubble in Tremor and get out and see the world and meet people.
No kidding. So then how did you make the transition over here to the United States? Was it a job opening, or is it something where you said, you know what, I want to get out of the bubble and, like you said, and travel the world?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a fun story that everyone at the hotel likes to talk about. I had worked at that property as a sales and marketing executive, but on this one particular night, my restaurant manager called me and said, Kerry, would you mind helping me out and taking a shift for me in the restaurant? One of my people called out sick. I'm like, yeah, no problem. I'll take care of it. And I go in and there's a table of 4 Americans. And they're, very fun. And they're like, hey, will you just pick our menu for us? You seem to know the menu, serve us wine. And so we get chatting. They're very engaging. And because in Ireland, the way the restaurant is structured is the manager in fine dining takes all your orders and interacts with you, and the servers just drop your food off at the table for you. And so we spent the whole night interacting. And halfway through the dinner, I thought to myself, this guy is interviewing me for something. Like, why is he asking me all these questions? And he finally said, have you studied all of this? And he just kind of threw his hands up in the air. I'm like the architecture? Are you asking a question about the castle? He's like, no, hotels. And at that point I graduated. And so I told him my story. I've graduated. And he goes, what are you looking to do next? And I said, I'm searching for jobs in the States or China. At the time I was looking at China as well. And, you can't get a job without a visa. You can't get a visa without a job. And by the end of it, he goes, well, I work for this major hotel brand in San Diego, and we do visas for people all the time. Here's my business card. I think you're fantastic. If you ever want a job, let me know. And so I waited about 2 days and I sent him my resume when I knew he had flown back to the States. And I sent him my resume. 3 weeks later, I was on a call very like this, interviewing with the director of human resources. And then a couple months after that, I was on a plane with a visa in my hand, arriving at San Diego airport, being picked up by the hotel security team. So that's how I ended up here. And it was an 18-month gig because Ireland has a visa program with the States called a J1 visa that you can do as a graduate in hotels, but you have to work in every single department in the hotel. So I arrived for 18 months, single department, from security to finance to sales, how I met Jen and Brian, to food and beverage, you name it, I did it, and then ended up in events for the final kind of 5 months.
Kerry, why don't you touch on what you do professionally? That might help.
Yeah. So I plan all of the conferences and conventions that happen at the hotel. Brian and Jen, they book them. Thank you. So they contract them all, and then they hand them to me, and I detail them out. By that, I mean we figure out what they want to eat every day, how they want their meeting rooms set, how many guest rooms are actually going to arrive, and we help them coordinate all of the logistics. So any type of conference you can think of, from a medical conference to a corporation that's holding its annual sales event, to ComicCon, which I know Brian loves to watch happen. We do that annually. So that's my job, is to make sure all of the information is pulled together and then hand it off to all of the teams that actually execute the conferences once they arrive. So I spend about 2 years planning with every group.
Did you ever have a point in your time where you just said, you know what, I don't want to do this, I want to go back home?
Not the first 18 months. I really just was so immersed in it and enjoying learning everything. And I'm a very curious person. So the fact that they let me work in all these different departments and I met all these wonderful people, I definitely, towards the end, it was a long time to go without going home, but I never thought about throwing in the towel in those 18 months. But then, I left and then I came back. And there's been times in the last 7 years, because you're a lot more settled, and this is now your life, it's not just a 2-year thing, that I've thought to myself, why am I working so far away from home and working this hard, and being away from family, that I've thought maybe I should go back. And then something changes my mind. But it's definitely crossed my mind these past 6 years. When it's really busy at work and you're tired and you just think, I'm really far away from home, and what am I achieving? There are those moments.
Has any of your family ever thought about coming out here to move, or they're fine at home and they'll just come out and visit?
They're fine at home. They come out and visit. Well, it's really just my mom, because my father passed away last year. So, and he wasn't really one to travel. Just in the middle of COVID was just a kind of a weird year last year. But it was always me and my mom. They were separated. So the two of us were kind of together always, and just our little group. So she comes out and visits, but it would be very hard for her to live here, I think, because she has her routine and she has all of her friends back home, because she was widowed when my stepfather passed away when I was 14. And ever since then, she's just kind of had her little routine in her house. So she loves visiting. The last time she visited was for ComicCon, the 50th anniversary. She's a huge Star Wars fan. So she just really never understood the scope and size of what I did. And she walked into downtown San Diego the first day of Comic-Con, and just, 100,000 people, all of the activity at the hotel. She was quite overwhelmed by it, and then just very impressed. She's like, oh, my daughter does this, telling everyone. So.
And you mentioned your mom is sort of your role model. She's the person that you look up to. Maybe can you dive a little bit? You've already said some really great things. Is there any further stuff you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, she's just, was a single parent basically from the age of 4 for me. So my mom and dad, they separated at that point. It just wasn't working for them. And before that, she had actually, so my dad is the brother of the man my mom's sister married. Does that make sense? So my mom's sister.
I need a calculator.
I know.
So
Carry the one.
Yeah.
They basically they married 2 brothers essentially. But my mom's sister got married in Tremor to this man, and his brother came to the wedding, and my mom met the brother, fell for him. They all went back to London, and my mom was still in Ireland, and then she just up and went to London because that's just what she wanted to do, but didn't tell her sister or the rest of her family. So she moved in with my dad and was living in London, just exploring and just taking a chance on life, when her sister went looking for her and figured out where she probably was. And then a year later, they were pregnant with me, and, she was permanently in London, and then established this whole life, and gotten herself a job and was working really hard. And so I just always think about, she was around 25 when she did that, just hopped out of a small town in Ireland and went to London just on a leap of faith, and established a very long life there, and worked really, really hard to make sure that I never went without anything, because I can't say that we grew up with a lot of money. We were, there were days where we were pretty poor at some points, depending on her jobs, and I never went without. I was still in all the school clubs. I was still able to go on all the school trips, and she would work 2 and 3 jobs to make that happen. And then, when we moved back to Ireland, there was a point when my stepfather passed away that, again, we were in that financial difficulty, and she just never left it affect my childhood. And it's very easy when you grow up in a small town for your parents to not want you to go anywhere, to not really encourage that ambition. But she was always just pushing me to go, because even though she hadn't completed high school or gone to college, she just wanted that so badly for me that everything she did was to push me further and further. And when I said to her, this opportunity in San Diego, but I can't leave you by yourself, because I'm an only child, so it's hard to leave a parent that you're so close to, and you worry about how they're going to cope and, who's going to take care of them. And she's like, if you don't go, I'm never going to talk to you again. Aww. And, we talk all the time about, should I come home? Because she's older now. She's heading towards her 60s. And I said, and she has some poor health. And I said, do you need me to come home? She's like, if you come home, I'm not talking to you. Don't even walk into this house. And she just really wants me to live my life for me and not for anyone else. And so, I really appreciate her for always having that drive to make my life better, and to encourage me. And then she's the one who gave me the travel bug. I mean, we went on adventures in London all the time, even though we didn't have the money to go on these foreign trips or Disneyland or anything like that. Every Saturday and Sunday, we're in the tube, just picking random spots on the tube map and going there and exploring it. So she's really the foundation of everything I do in my life. And my goals now are to just work hard enough that I can return some of that favor. So I've taken her to Italy and, over here to San Diego, because she's done so much for me and everything in my childhood to get me where I am now, that I want to be able to allow her to enjoy that and get a chance to see parts of the world that she couldn't when she was younger.
Well, I'm going to ask you the question about you when you told her you were coming here, and something she's like, if you don't go, I'm going to be mad at you. And that when I did my trek way back when to San Diego, my mom said the same thing. She's like, if you don't get in that car and drive, she's like, I will not be happy. And I think that's important. I think you need, when you decide to dive into something, you really need to have that person. I called it an anchor when I was talking to Mario last week. Mario Sagastumi. You need to have that one thing that sort of pushes you and makes sure, it's easy to want to quit. It's easy to want to take the easy way out. But once you get going and that person gets you there, it's all good stuff for sure.
Go on and explain the whole ComicCon. Give us like what ComicCon is. I mean, not I know what it is, but maybe other people who don't know what it is, and what it takes for you to get that up and running.
Yeah, so ComicCon's a pop culture event. Depending on it, San Diego is the original Comic-Con. I think that's the important thing for people to realize, and it's what is referenced in most, movies or TV shows. When they talk about Comic-Con, they're talking about Comic-Con San Diego. And it really, what a lot of people don't realize, is a nonprofit organization that focuses on the use of comics to help in education, right? And to encourage people who are more artistic and creative to learn through a different medium. And so the organization itself is actually mostly run by retired teachers or active teachers that all volunteer their time to further the use of the creative arts in education, and to encourage artists to start writing comics and to use that medium and to keep that art form alive. And it started in San Diego like 45 years ago or so. Wow. And it really only became a kind of pop culture phenomenon in about the last 15 years. I would say 2008, Twilight had a lot to do with the studios all coming to Comic-Con San Diego and showcasing, the movies and getting cast to interact with fans. And that's really when it turned in San Diego from this educational platform to also this platform for Hollywood to showcase their latest TV shows and movies. And 2008 too was around the time that Marvel Studios began their superhero movie plan. And that's really what has spurned on Comic-Con to become as big as it has here for the last 15 odd years. So yeah, for 4 days every July, about 150,000 comic book fans and geeks and whatever you want to put a label on it, descend on San Diego. And what's fun about the way San Diego is structured is all the hotels are really close together. So is the convention center, so are all the restaurants. So, and they have a lot of outdoor space in between these areas. All the studios build these TV or movie experiences for fans to go in and experience part of their favorite movie or TV show. So it becomes this Comic-Con campus, I always describe it, downtown San Diego. All the hotels start to get wrapped in advertisements for various movies and shows. And then all the people just arrive and you can't see the pavement.
I gotta stop you on the what you just brought up, the wrapping of the buildings. So tell us the email you had to write about wrapping our buildings. Tell them what wrapping a building is. Just tell listeners what that is.
Yeah, so when you wrap a building, you essentially, it's just you're making a giant billboard for all the world, but you're using a hotel building to do it. And it's this material that you put in strips, and then eventually it makes this one large advertisement. So in this case, I won't name the studio or I'll get in trouble, but it was a TV show that had a pretty graphic artwork as part of their show. And, it was this zombie virus type TV show. And they have to send me the artwork for approval. But before, in previous years, they had sent similar artwork and always gotten approved. However, this year they decided to turn the Statue of Liberty into a man, make the teeth the skyline of New York City, and then have this very violent red kind of tongue or whatever you call it.
Like a serpent tongue.
Yeah, serpent tongue coming out of its mouth because it had gotten the virus. And, they sent it to me for approval. And I thought to myself, oh, this might be the one that loses my job. Because I've already sold this. I had to walk into my boss's office and say, hey, here's the artwork. What are your thoughts? And he looked at me, he's like, because there was saliva dripping off the tongue. It was just all sorts of,
wrong,
not appropriate to be on a 60-foot building, because it's huge once you put it up on the building. So the artwork couldn't even really translate what it's going to look like on the building. And he's just this very unique gentleman. And he kind of looks at me, he's like, Kerry, it's too phallic. It's too phallic. You need to fix this. And so I have to go back to the TV show and write them an email and say, unfortunately, I need you to make some edits to this artwork. And they come back and they're like, but this is the show art. And here's the thing, when you work with these studios, they're not making the art for your building. They're making the art is for their show. And any change you ask them to do is, in their mind, compromising the artwork concepts for all of their show designs. And so they're just like, we can't do it, Kerry. And so I had to call them and say, listen, it's too phallic. You have to fix it. I can't have this giant thing coming out of this person's mouth and the saliva dripping. And, I need to change the color. So for 2 months, we went back and forth on these negotiations with my boss, myself, and the TV studio. Can you tone down the red color? Can you make the tongue less veiny? Can you do this? And I thought to myself, this is not a conversation I ever thought I would have as a hotel event manager. And I can't wait till this ends. And then the day it goes up, I'm just thinking to myself, God, this is worse than I expected, because you just don't realize how big it's going to be until they slap it on the building.
So they made a compromise and did something different?
They didn't change the artwork. They dulled down the redness of the tongue. They took out some of the veins and they took off the dripping saliva, but that was about it.
They are so fun.
Yeah. So do you have certain studios that you contract with for the building?
Yeah, so for us, our hotel is right next to the convention center. So we actually do some ComicCon programming, and then we sell all of our outdoor spaces to studios to build what they call activations, where they build fan experiences. And then inside our building, we have a lot of press interviews that happen. But then anywhere on the outside of the building, they can wrap. So I sell that to various different studios. So from the likes of Amazon Prime to FX, and around the whole city of San Diego, every hotel is wrapped with some kind of movie or TV show advertising.
You're still so young. You've accomplished so much in your career. As a female in a leadership role, like what sort of advice would you give to somebody specifically for females that are looking to obtain a leadership role? Like what advice would you give in hospitality or not?
Yeah, no, and this is something I work with my team on. There's a lot of women on our events team that I really try and work with, because it's hard. I won't. Hospitality is one of those industries. The boys club still exists, where you really. My way of doing things is you earn people's respect and then you kick the door in and you don't take no for an answer. So I just try and make myself as valuable as possible. To the point where they're like, how do we do this? Oh, we have to ask Kerry. How do we do that? We have to ask Kerry. So I just say to everyone, don't be intimidated by the boys club. Don't be afraid to speak up. You have so much to offer that you need to stop being so timid about stepping up and saying, hey, that's not correct. This is how you should do it. Or, hey, I have a really great idea on how to do this. You just have to be bold. When you get into an industry like ours, in any industry in management, but for women in particular, it can be tough. You can sit at a meeting, there's a lot of banter going back and forth, and unless you can learn to keep up with that and insert yourself in it, you're always going to feel like you're sitting on the outside looking in. So I just kind of be bold, kick the door in, try and find ways to connect with people too, because I think the thing with when people talk about a boys club in a management setting, it's just because they have relationships, right? And they're connecting on topics that are familiar to them, and they can shoot the shit, if you will. Learn how to shoot the shit with someone, whether you're interested in involved, you don't have to be interested. Find something that you know about that they like and shoot the shit with them. And it helps you build these relationships. Everything I've done my whole career has been based around being able to connect with people. And then they want to just sit there and talk to you. They want to defer to you because they've learned something about you. They respect you, and they want to give you a chance to speak up. But it's really tough. I mean, when I was younger, I didn't do it as much as I do now. And it's a hard skill to learn, to not do what we're probably programmed to do. Maybe not this generation, but certainly when I was growing up, you were programmed to be a bit more modest, a little bit shy in a way when you're in business. And there wasn't a lot of talk about women in leadership, and there weren't a lot of women for us to look up to. And so you didn't have anyone to learn from. We are just as good in senior leadership, if not better, if you ask me. It's just having the doors opened for us and having the people that will show us how to use our skill sets, because I don't want to be the same as a male manager. I'm different, right? Mm-hmm. But it's how do I use my skill sets and my expertise in my own way that's not the same as a male manager. I don't want to learn how to lead like that, because that's just not going to ever be my style.
Where do you see yourself in 10 to 15 years? Where do you want to go? What's the big picture for you?
So I actually have been asking myself that for the last year. Where do I want to go next? But I've started my master's in strategic public relations at George Washington University. So I'm doing it online at the moment. And what I want to do with that, ideally, is to move more towards into a nonprofit environment. Because my original intention with events had been to work in events for nonprofits to help them fundraise. And I just never got there because of all of this wonderful opportunity I was given. So moving into nonprofit management to help develop programs and advocacy programs for, any issue that I feel, speaks to what I'm interested in. But just learning that strategic communication piece and more of the political science attached to that, and using that skill set in a leadership role, but on a nonprofit side. It's very exhausting to be in a corporate environment, and I love my job, don't get me wrong, but to be always chasing a bottom line. And I'm at a point in my career where that's just not enough anymore. I want to find a bit more of a purpose and chase something else and make an impact in other areas. So not that I would entirely leave corporate, but I see myself doing kind of a dual role where I work in both a leadership role as a director of events and hopefully a mentor to many female leaders coming up behind me. And then in tandem work in nonprofit organization, helping them to further their agenda and their messaging and raise funds for very important issues. And what those issues are, we'll see in the next couple of years.
Some Ireland question. I've never been to Ireland. I don't know if Derek or
No.
Jen have been there.
Italy, not
It's on my
Ireland.
list.
So well, certainly give us a description of what we see and how and why we should go there and visit, and then your favorite Irish pint and your favorite Irish meal.
Okay. Well, I mean, Ireland is as green as they say it is. That is not an exaggeration on any photo or video that you see. When you fly over Ireland, you see this patchwork of different shades of green, and it is just stunning. And then as you drive around Ireland, you're just met with all of these ruins of castles and, you know, different structures from 1200s, the 1400s. History is just everywhere. And then the cities, depending on what city you're in, they're, you know, they have their Viking influences that you can still see today. You know, cobbled streets and really colorfully painted house doors, and pubs are always very colorful with, you know, flowers hanging. All of those pictures that you see, they are accurate. I mean, Ireland is a very aesthetically pleasing place, and just the air is the cleanest air I've ever, you know, had the pleasure of breathing in. And the oceans are wild, and it is just a very fascinating place. And you do feel like there are, you know, some fantasy mythical things about it. So it's still my favorite place on the planet. And New Zealand's very similar to it, but Ireland just has a little extra something. And the people, I mean, the people will help you and they'll want to chat your ear off. They really are that friendly. So I highly recommend going. If you haven't been, you should. And then my favorite pint, Brian, I never drank beer until I moved to San Diego. Fun fact.
Or until you started the hotel industry.